Hi there, my name is Allison Chartrand and I study glaciers in Antarctica. I am a PhD student and earth scientist at the Byrd Polar and Climate Research Center at The Ohio State University. I think it's really important to show that scientists are just regular people. So what makes me a scientist? Well, I am a PhD student in an earth science program and I have a bachelor's and master's degree in science majors. But I think what really makes me a scientist is my passion for learning and generating knowledge about the natural world. By that definition, anyone who loves to learn, make discoveries, and teach people about those discoveries is a scientist. You may be thinking, but what is a PhD student? PhD stands for Doctor of Philosophy. So basically, I am in graduate school to become a Doctor of Philosophy in the field of glaciology. Grad school for a PhD student takes about 4 to 7 years after they've already completed college, and it's more like a job than it is like being in high school or college. You have to take a few classes at the beginning, but you get paid to work on a project that interests you, become the expert in that topic, and write papers and a dissertation about your project. You may also be thinking, what are glaciers? Or if you know what a glacier is, you may be thinking, why do you study glaciers? I promise I'll answer both those questions. But before I do that, I would like to acknowledge the indigenous peoples who discovered and cared for the land we occupy before the arrival of European colonizers. I grew up on the traditional homelands of the Onondaga Nation. The Onondaga are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederation, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on what is now called upstate New York. I attended college at Northwestern University, which occupies the original homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which included the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Ottawa peoples. There are no federally recognized tribes in what is now called Illinois, nor in Ohio, where I currently live. The Ohio State University occupies the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Hopewell, Shawnee, Potawatomi, Miami, and Wyandot peoples. I want to honor the resiliency of these tribal nations and recognize the historical contexts that have and continue to affect the indigenous peoples of these lands. So I like to start out with land acknowledgements like this because a big part of my life as a scientist is making STEM fields more equitable and inclusive for everyone. Earth science, unfortunately, has a dark history of contributing to the theft and exploitation of indigenous lands. But a lot of people are presently working very hard to celebrate and include indigenous people in their scientific knowledge. I am part of a fantastic organization that celebrates and honors the scientific achievements of Native American and Chicano people, and all people of color, called SACNAS. I am the vice president of the SACNAS chapter at Ohio State, and I am also part of the diversity committee at the Byrd Polar and Climate Research Center. Through these roles, I strive to make STEM more welcoming for all. Alright, so now you know that I don't just do science in a lab all day. In fact, these days I sit in front of my computer in my home office for both my inclusion work and my glacier research. Back to the big question, what is a glacier? A glacier is a slowly moving mass or river of ice formed by the accumulation and compaction of snow on mountains or near the poles. Basically, a glacier forms when snow builds up year after year, and the weight of the new snow presses down and compacts the old snow, squeezing all the air out of it until it becomes pure ice, which then moves downhill under its own weight when it gets big and heavy enough. Glaciers come in all places, shapes, and sizes, from small glaciers on Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa to the ice sheet that covers Antarctica at the South Pole. And I study glaciers because I care about how they are being affected by anthropogenic climate change. By this, I mean that human-generated greenhouse gas emissions are causing the climate to get warmer, which causes the glaciers to melt faster, and then all that glacier meltwater is contributing to sea level rise. However, when and how glaciers melt is very complicated, and while we are certain that they will continue to melt, we don't know how much they will melt or how quickly. Glaciers have already melted enough to raise the sea level by 1.8 centimeters, or about 1 inch since I was born, and in the next 100 years, we could see the sea level rise more by anything from 0.25 meters, which is about 10 inches, to 1 meter, or about 3 feet. For a little more context, this is what Houston and Antarctica both look like now, not to scale. And this is what they would look like with 3 feet of sea level rise. My research helps us narrow that range of uncertainty so that scientists and lawmakers can help people who live in coastal regions decide how to best adapt. My research actually focuses on a pretty small part of the scientific processes used to predict ice melt and sea level rise. I specifically study ice shelves in Antarctica. If you take a slice of Antarctica and imagine it as a muffin, with the bedrock being the part in the paper cup and the ice being the muffin top, the ice shelves are the part that hang over the edge of the cup. Ice shelves are actually floating in the ocean, but they are still attached to the ice sheet. And they're very important to the ice sheet staying intact because they push back against the flow of the glaciers into the ocean. Think of it as, without the edges of the muffin tops, the crumbs would just be falling off everywhere. I study how ice shelves are impacted by melting from below, whether that melting is caused by warm ocean water or by fresh water from upside-down rivers, which we call basal channels, that flow out from below the ice sheet. I study ice shelf melt by using remote sensing measurements of the ice. Remote sensing is a way to take measurements from space or from an airplane without actually having to go on the glaciers. I use math along with measurements of ice surface elevation, ice shelf thickness, and ice speed to determine how basal channels are melting ice shelves and making them less stable. These calculations will make estimates of future ice sheet melt and sea level rise more accurate. Alright, we really went in the weeds there. I didn't even know what a basal channel was until I started my PhD 4 years ago, but now I'm one of the world's experts. One thing I hope you take away from this video is that you don't need to have your whole STEM career planned out already. You may discover something completely new and spend your time studying something you can't even imagine yet. And the path that I took to where I am today had some twists and turns. When I was little, I wanted to be a veterinarian. By the time I was in middle school, I wanted to be a professional musician. I went to college to study French horn performance and environmental science, but it wasn't until my senior year that I decided that I wanted to go to grad school for science. And I still didn't know exactly what I wanted to study. So I took a couple of years to figure it out, during which I worked as a lifeguard, a nanny, a naturalist at a nature center, and as a field scientist at Parsons Corporation, where I did environmental and geological quality control on a lake cleanup project. All through that time, I still was thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up. With some help from my awesome mentors, most of whom were women, I decided I wanted to study glaciers. And I applied to grad school. If you're still curious about what grad school is, how to apply, and what it's like, I encourage you to check out my Twitter and the outreach page and video on my website. Outside of grad school, I love to hang out with my dog Tuba and my fiance Tony and bake cookies and run. I do watch a lot of TV, and my favorite show is Parks and Recreation. I just finished the first season of Rutherford Falls, and that was great too. Whenever I get a break from work, I usually spend it with my family in upstate New York, where we do a lot of frozen and liquid water sports. On the drive to and from New York, I like to listen to music from Panic at the Disco and Hamilton, and to podcasts like Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, Office Ladies, and Stutter Podcast Repeat, which was created by my good friend David Sanchez. I also like to travel, and most of my travel in the past few years has been grad school related. In 2018, I had the opportunity to go to Alaska for a glaciology summer school, which was absolutely awesome. We lived off the grid for 10 days learning about and walking on glaciers in the Wrangell St. Elias National Park. I've also traveled to Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and Honolulu, Hawaii for scientific conferences. If you're unfamiliar, a scientific conference is a lot like Comic-Con, but for science. Students, faculty, and other scientists get together to give poster and oral presentations on their research, and there is always a large exhibit hall where awesome schools, companies, and research institutions hand out swag and information about applying to degree programs, internships, and jobs. The most popular booth at the conferences that I've been to has been the NASA booth, where people line up for the elusive stickers and NASA calendars. Alright, I guess I snuck a bit of science life back in there at the end. I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned a bit. Please feel free to reach out with any questions you have, and feel free to follow me on Twitter at IceShelvesandAC. Thanks so much for listening.